Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I'm Marco Davis. I'm the president and CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, CHCI, and welcome to the second installment of CHCI's virtual briefing series on COVID-19. Today's session will focus on the socioeconomic impact on the Latino community. I'm pleased to share that Telemundo has joined us as a media partner, and they're streaming this session on their digital platform as well. And to that end, I have a brief message for the Telemundo audience. Buenas tardes, señoras y señores. Gracias por su interés en nuestro programa de hoy. Les quiero informar que nuestra discusión en vivo será conducida en inglés y pueden seguir sintonizando si gustan, pero también se producirá una traducción del programa al español y esperamos que será disponible aquí en la plataforma digital de Telemundo dentro de poco tiempo, así que también podrán recibir esta información en su idioma después. Now, for those of you not fortunate enough to be bilingual, don't worry. I was just informing the Telemundo viewers that the program today will be conducted in English, but that we will be working to provide a Spanish translation of the discussion soon, which Telemundo will make available on their digital platform. Before I go any further, I want to take a moment to thank the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, who have provided generous support for this session. We're grateful for their standing by us and for helping us to disseminate this valuable information for and about the Latino community. Now, we're thrilled that more than 500 of you have registered to join us today for this important conversation, and we're also streaming this live on Facebook in addition to the Telemundo platform. So you can tell folks who are unable to register in time that they can find us either by going to the CHCI Facebook page or going to the telemundo.com platform. A couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be available on the CHCI website afterwards, so you can also share that with folks who aren't able to watch. And also, once the session is concluded or you sign off, you will be prompted to fill out an evaluation survey. Please let us know how this session went for you and how we can make these events even better. We were thrilled to receive so many thought-provoking questions in advance on aspects of the COVID-19 crisis in the Latino community. We've tried to organize them into topics and themes and pull up the most frequent elements, which I'll be using as a basis for my questions to the panel, because there were simply too many to be able to get to each one individually. Also, throughout this hour, the Q&A feature here on Zoom is enabled, and you will be able to submit questions during this time, which if time permits, I will try to select from those for our speakers as well. Please don't submit questions via the chat function. That's actually for commenting in general, for example, sharing where you're dialing in from, where you're tuning in from. We won't be pulling questions from the chat to have into the queue. We'll be doing that from the Q&A function. And finally, it is a live show, so we hope we won't have any technical issues navigating this virtual format, but please bear with us if we do. We'll work to resolve them as quickly as possible. And now on to our discussion. As you know, at CHCI, we focus on developing new leadership for the Latino community, convening established leaders from all sectors, and engaging in dialogues about the most important issues facing both our community and the nation. Today is another installment of bringing those efforts online. This work is critically important right now because we have now seen the current crisis has exposed and further magnified the deeply rooted inequalities in our society. Now, more than ever, our voices matter. We must have a seat at the table, not only as we reflect on the present crisis, but also to ensure we prevent further inequality in the future. The core of any future solution must include both diversity of thought and of the decision makers that reflect our diverse society. Today, as I mentioned, we're focusing on the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 on our community. So let's get to the conversation. I'm going to bring on my first guest, and I'm only doing the briefest of introductions for our speakers each time I welcome them on, both in the interest of using our time effectively, but also because in this highly digital world, I encourage you to simply look up these leaders online. They have great information. They've been in the public sphere. You can learn more about them, and you can even engage them via their websites. So to start us off, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Adriana Kugler, full professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. She's done extensive work on economics, and in fact, I first got to know Dr. Kugler and her work during the Obama administration, when in her capacity as chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor, she came and spoke with my colleagues and me at the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics. Hello there, Dr. Kugler. It's great to see you.
Hi, Marco. Thank you so much for inviting me to this important briefing.
No problem. So let's get right into it. Let's start us off. Being that you study this at the macro level, I thought it would be helpful if you could help us set the tone. So where are we heading as a country and as an economy? How do we emerge from this calamity? Is our economic model fundamentally broken? Do we need an entirely new approach, or do you think this is something can be fixed? What's the best way that we're going to be able to get through this, particularly the most economically vulnerable?
So let me first start by saying that we're living through an unprecedented time with dual crisis. A health crisis, unlike anything we've seen since the 1918 Spanish flu, and an economic crisis at the same time, unlike anything we've seen since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Except this time we're seeing the crisis together. So this is really unprecedented. In terms of the health side, we have seen 1.5 million people already infected, over 90,000 people who have already died. These are the highest numbers anywhere in the world. And on the economic side, we have seen a decline, a downturn in economic activity that has occurred very, very quickly, much quicker than even in the Great Recession back in 2010. So basically, we saw in the first quarter a decline of close to 5% in terms of GDP, and we can expect a decline of at least 30% in the second quarter of 2020. This, unfortunately, has come at the cost of many, many people losing their jobs. More than 36 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits, and the unemployment rate has climbed to 15% so far. It is probably even higher than that by now. It's about closer to 20%. Unfortunately, these two crises have impacted disproportionately Latino communities, and this is incredibly worrisome. Latinos are not only being infected and dying at higher rates than other communities, but they have also suffered more from the economic crisis. On the health front, something that is very worrisome is that we know that Latinos are 3 times more likely to be uninsured, and they're also more likely to suffer from comorbidities. So they're more likely to suffer from being infected by COVID. They're also more likely to be essential and critical workers, which exposes the Latino community much more to this disease. And on the economic front, unfortunately, Latinos are also overrepresented in sectors that have suffered the most on the economic front. So for example, the hospitality sector, the retail sector, temp workers were overrepresented in all those sectors. And that means that we have lost jobs at much higher rates than other communities. Our unemployment rate is in fact 19%, so a lot higher than the 15% that is reported overall. So we have been hit very, very hard. What is different at this time than in previous recessions is that these two crises are interrelated. We cannot come out of the economic crisis if we don't first come out of the health crisis. So it is very important for us to be ready to provide enough PPE, to provide enough testing, to provide enough treatments and vaccines when the time comes, so that people can emerge safely out in the public sphere again. And until that happens, people are not going to spend and go out as if nothing is happening. And companies, businesses are not going to hire back again. So this is why we need to deal with one crisis first before we're able to deal with the second crisis, which is the economic crisis. They're both very important, but they're very interrelated. I have to be very grateful to the 2 congresswomen who are in the call today, because they've done some incredible work through the CARES Act, which was introduced at the end of March, and with the HEROES Act, which was just approved in the House of Representatives last Friday, in the sense that they have introduced some key measures there. So you were asking, what can we do for the most vulnerable? And I think what we can do is to introduce a stimulus plan, the way it has been done by Congress. This is very key. Those $2 trillion and the other $3 trillion that are being planned under the HEROES Act are really key to get the economy going again and to help people overcome this situation. So pay relief is very key, because that reaches the most vulnerable. It gets people to spend money right away, because these are people who don't have the choice to go and keep that money and save it and put it in the bank. The other element of this is unemployment insurance. So the pandemic unemployment assistance, which was introduced under the CARES Act, has been key as well in terms of helping the unemployed. And finally, PPP, the Paycheck Protection Act, which program, which helps precisely small businesses to keep workers, right? It's contingent on keeping workers and making sure you keep people on payroll. So it plays that dual role of keeping businesses going, especially small businesses, but also helping the most vulnerable, which are the workers that are about to lose their jobs. So those three elements, I think, have been very key, and we should definitely support those efforts and make sure we call Congress, we call the Senate, which is stalling on moving ahead with the HEROES Act, so that they definitely make sure they put on those $3 trillion so badly needed in the economy.
I'm muted. Thank you for that. That's really helpful context setting. I think you set a really good frame to help us think about how we sort of sequence correctly this challenge and how we sort of see our way through. Let me ask you a question. So we, as you know, CHCI works a lot with young people. We have an extensive alumni network of young professionals. What advice would you give to a young person who's finishing school now, or who maybe was in a job and that has been laid off, unfortunately, whose job has been eliminated and may not be coming back? What kind of things do you see in terms of the economic trends that are something they should consider? Should it be going into healthcare, or are there other opportunities and areas that they should be looking at?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So my recommendations are twofold. On the one hand, I agree with you that people should be looking into going into those sectors that have not been heavily affected by the pandemic and the economic downturn. And those two sectors, as you said, you hit it right in the nail, right? So the first one is healthcare. We have had, even prior to this pandemic, we had a shortage of people in the healthcare sector. The American Medical Association had estimated, even prior to the pandemic, that there would be a shortage of 100,000 doctors by 2030. The other sector is the technology sector. So interestingly, there, again, prior to the pandemic and prior to the economic downturn, there was already a shortage of people in the IT sector. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that by the end of 2020, there will be 1 million jobs in IT that cannot be filled because there aren't enough people who can take those jobs and who can do the jobs. And in some sense, you know, we're all here virtually. We need IT help, and we need technicians to help us out through these times. It's something that is in really high demand. So those two sectors are key. So if one is going to choose to go and explore new opportunities, those are two very potentially good sectors to join. And then the other thing that I would say is there are many universities and many programs that are being offered free online. So stay engaged, stay educated, try to keep taking courses online, try to keep taking programs online if possible, and try to do volunteer or internships online as well, virtually, with people who actually are not able to hire right now, but they could really use the help. So those are two different things that one can do during these times.
That's great. Thank you so much, Doctor. And that's, I'm afraid, all the time we have for you. So thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate your insights and your framing of the conversation. And we appreciate your leadership and care for the well-being of the community. We'll look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much, Marco.
All righty. And now our next guest we have is, as Dr. Kugel alluded to, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, who represents the 38th Congressional District of the great state of California. In addition to serving as the Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, the fifth highest ranking position in the House Democratic leadership, and being on the powerful House Committee on Ways and Means, the Congresswoman is a dear friend of CHCI, having served as our chair from 2015 to 2017. Welcome, Congresswoman. Do we have you here?
I am here.
Welcome. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for being here. So what are your thoughts? Tell us, first of all, on how you're doing and what you're seeing in the work you're doing.
Sure. So what we have known from the beginning is that the Trump administration really was sort of flat-footed on its response to the pandemic. And as a direct result, that's caused huge economic stress and heartbreak for families across America. And more than anything, I think it's really magnified the disparities that already existed for the Latino community. So it's actually made that even worse, but it's really shined a light on those disparities. According to all the data, Latinos have been hit especially hard by the coronavirus. 1 in 5 Latinos are out of work during the pandemic. Latinos have one of the highest uninsured rates for healthcare. So, that's a barrier for us. And we also tend to disproportionately work in those sectors that are deemed essential sectors, essential workers. So we're critical for our nation's infrastructure, and yet there are a lot of hurdles and risks that come with being an essential employee. Just for example, I read a LA Times article recently about a woman named Lupe Martinez who worked for a nursing home doing the laundry in a nursing home in Riverside. And each day she was faced with an agonizing choice of, do I stay home and forego my $13 an hour job, or do I show up and put myself at risk, but be able to, earn that paycheck and help my family? So she chose to go to work, even after the masks started to run low, even after there was a patient whose room she had entered without protective gear, fell ill, and they isolated. And now, as a result of her going in because she needed that paycheck, she, her husband, and her daughter and son have all tested positive for COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So our essential workers, they're on the front line doing these jobs, but they're risking their own health and the health of their families. And as I said, disproportionately, it's Latinos who are doing that. On top of that, Latino entrepreneurs are among the small businesses that are hardest hit because of the economic fallout from COVID-19. As the good doctor was saying previously, we tend to own businesses in those sectors that interface with the public a lot and rely on that public, whether it's retail or hair salons or nail salons, we rely on that as our lifeblood. So those economic, the loss of business is compounding those challenges that Latinos already face in the economy, such as, lack of access to capital and, for some people, they're the unbanked, they don't even have, mm-hmm. bank accounts. Everything that we know that affected Latinos prior to coronavirus is just exponential now. So that's kind of a grim picture, but I do want to give folks hope because we are working really hard to try to help provide the relief that these families and these businesses so desperately need. So we did pass the CARES Act at the end of March, and then last Friday night, the House passed another sweeping $3 billion, I won't even say stimulus bill, because you know what, to me, it's not even stimulus, it's a stabilization bill. It's just trying to help people keep their head above water and keep businesses from going under. And in that bill, there were so many good things. There were direct payments, again, to working families and businesses. What we tried to do was plug a lot of the holes that we found with CARES, because CARES we had to pass quickly. We needed to get the relief out quickly. We didn't have time to, fine tune it. So as a result of that, we saw where these gaps were, and that's what the HEROES Act tried to do, try to plug some of those gaps. So we're really, counting on this second stabilization bill to help provide that relief that many families, most especially Latino families, desperately need. However, Senate Republicans are refusing to work with us on a deal before the Memorial Day recess. And Trump is already threatening to veto any legislation that would provide further assistance. So we are trying to ramp up the pressure, quite honestly. I mean, our states and local governments are hard hit because they're not getting the revenue that they need. HEROES Act had a big infusion to help states that are battling this on a, and then having to deal with these huge economic losses. And if we don't shore up those states and cities, they're going to have to start laying off workers. Yeah. And they're going to lay off the very workers that we really rely on. Sanitation workers, transportation workers, people, cops, teachers. I mean, then the employment rate, which is the highest since the Depression, is going to go even higher. So we desperately need that relief. I think HEROES Act is a great starting point. So we're not going to stop. We're going to continue pushing. And I think that bill shows very clear priorities for what we need to do to help people, weather the economic shock of COVID-19 and to help get them back to work, but in a safe way that protects their health. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions folks might have.
And just to clarify, if memory serves, the HEROES Act, the figure on that was $3 trillion, isn't that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Excellent. And clearly, it's needed, right? It sounds like a huge number, but I mean, it is our entire economy that's suffering right now. So focusing specifically on some of the most severely impacted and some of the most vulnerable members of our community. We've heard some stories. We certainly know that, for example, the CARES Act had, speaking of loopholes that are challenges, gaps in it, right? That folks in mixed status families, anyone undocumented, was not eligible for the financial relief. We're also even hearing that some folks are afraid to apply for any type of benefits due to the public charge rule, right, as it's referred to. Do you know of any efforts? Are there something in legislation, and are there any groups you know of, or any entities that are able to provide support and resources even for folks, for example, in the nonprofit sector or otherwise, particularly for these most vulnerable members of our community?
Sure. I'll take the public charge part next, but let me just say that in the HEROES Act, we tried to address the shortfall, the big gap in CARES. In CARES, if you could not receive a direct payment or any assistance unless you had a Social Security number. Many folks use individual taxpayer numbers. We call them ITINs, and they pay taxes. They are taxpayers. In HEROES Act, if you have an ITIN, so if you're in a mixed status family, you can apply for that relief, and you are eligible for that relief. So we sought to right that injustice that was in the CARES Act. With respect, so there is relief. If we can get the Senate to work with us on HEROES Act and get it signed by the president, there will be relief for those mixed status families. And that should also help, DACA recipients in the CARES Act. If you were a dependent child under the age of 17, your parents got a $500 direct payment. If you were older than, or if you were out of college, I don't know if it was an age limit, but basically if you were out of college, you could get a direct payment.
Right.
But if you were in that 17 to 22-year-old range, neither your parents got the payment nor you got the payment. We fixed that in HEROES. That was another gap. So we fixed that in HEROES. That should help a lot of DACA recipients, hopefully. But with respect to the public charge rule, a lot of folks are really hesitant to access any kind of, healthcare services or food bank services, or even this direct federal aid or unemployment aid, because they're afraid of the public charge rule. It really is on a case-by-case basis, because some people that's not going to count towards their process of becoming a citizen. And because it's highly individualized, folks really need to check with an attorney. But there are many folks that can help answer those questions free of charge or low cost. So it's important for folks who are concerned about that to check with, immigration rights groups. In California, we have several nonprofits that have stepped up, including like the California Community Foundation, the California Endowment, Hispanics in Philanthropy, and they are all assisting immigrant families, weather this economic, nightmare. So, there are many private foundations and that are providing that economic assistance to families that were left behind in CARES Act. I want to also put in a big shout out to CHCI, who announced their launch of the COVID-19 Response Fund to provide that economic relief to families that were left out of CARES. Starting yesterday in California, the governor had announced that they were going to assist undocumented families and provide relief. And starting yesterday in California, undocumented families could begin applying for that relief. So if you're in California, and this is not the whole nation, but if you go to cdss.ca.gov, you can get information on how to access that relief and that assistance. And we will continue fighting up here to make sure that none of our families are left behind, regardless of their immigration status. I do also want to plug that Representative Cardenas and I introduced a bill that would give free COVID testing and treatment to anybody, regardless of status. So, you know, in a pandemic, everybody's health affects everybody else's health. We don't want people to be fearful of going and getting tested or getting treatment if they think they have it because they're scared of the public charge rule, for example, or because they're afraid of their immigration status.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, and hopefully other states can follow that example that California made, that they've really gone above and beyond. One final question for you. So we know there's a significant number of our population represented in the immigrant population. We're also significantly represented in the agriculture industry and in food industry, right? So from farm workers to meat packing, et cetera. What are you seeing, and what do you think are some of the solutions and the supports that we need to do to provide that segment of our community as well?
Yeah, I mean, Latinos, you know, without Latinos and Latino labor, our food supply chain would not exist, because whether you're talking, you know, in the agricultural fields or the meat packing plants, or even the retail end, our grocery store, you know, checkers, like right. Latinos are so overrepresented in those industries, and they're unusually susceptible to contracting the COVID-19 virus. So as more and more people become sick in that food supply chain, we could see shortages and, you know, food prices spike as a result, and even more Americans struggle with hunger if our food supply, if that chain is not a healthy one. Despite the critical role that, you know, farm workers play in our economy, you know, few of them really receive the protections that from COVID-19 that they need. And what's more, on top of that, the Trump administration doesn't have a national, robust testing strategy, so that many, you know, farm workers and food supply chain workers can't even get tested for the virus. If they become sick, many of them are ineligible for sick pay or paid leave. So they make the decision, hey, I got to continue to show up for work because I got to feed my family. And that in turn can mean further spread of COVID-19. The Families First Act that was passed by Congress requires employers to provide 2 weeks of paid sick leave. But sadly, many farm and agricultural companies are exempt from that requirement, which makes no sense because they're so vital, again, to make sure that we have healthy food supply in the United States. And on top of that, these essential workers in our food supply chain don't receive any kind of hazard pay to reflect the risk that they're taking in just showing up for work. So, you know, Rep. Cartwright and I have introduced a bill to give hazard pay to those workers who take on, who are essential, who take on increased risk to themselves and their families. And we're looking for ways that we can continue to, you know, get those workers the protections that they need. So, you know, requiring the employers to do testing, requiring employers to give paid sick leave, you know, giving them protective equipment, making sure that they're spaced far enough apart, you know, making sure that the USDA, because there have been many disruptions in the food supply chain, instead of letting, you know, dumping milk or letting fruits and vegetables rot, rerouting that to food banks to help some of our most vulnerable families, which include the very workers that that pick and prepare the food for us. So we're working on all of that.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. We really appreciate you being here with us. That's the time we have with you. We appreciate your leadership, your advocacy for our community, your fighting in the halls of Congress. We hear, and certainly we hope you get the support you need to pass those various different bills that are actually going to provide real support for our community. So thanks so much for your time today and for the work that you're doing up there on the Hill.
Thank you for your work as well.
All righty. We'll talk to you soon. And before I bring on our next guest, I just do want to acknowledge we're getting some really, really great questions coming in. As you can see, our time is tight. We're navigating in this new space, managing sort of the balance of bringing on our guests and remarks and trying to get in questions. We're going to do what we can. I'm going to challenge my team to try and find some ways to maybe put up on our website some of the information that folks are asking about, or at least pointing to places to get information about some of these questions, because they're really good topics that I know are important for not just the folks asking the questions, but for many in our community. So we're going to keep going with our program, but do know that we're not ignoring the questions. We're trying to see if we can work them in. And like I said, we're going to see if we can figure out something for a follow-up to at least make some of that information available. All right, and now to bring on our third speaker, I'm especially pleased to welcome Congressman Rubén Gallego, who represents the 7th District of the great state of Arizona. Congressman Gallego is an assistant whip for the House Democratic Caucus and serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the Natural Resources Committee, including serving as chair of the Natural Resources Subcommittee for the Indigenous Peoples of the United States. But to us, he's a steadfast champion because he serves as the chairman of CHCI since 2019. So good to see you as always, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Marco.
So tell us how you're doing. Tell us what you've been working on, what you're seeing that is impacting the Latino community and where we need to go.
Well, largely what I've been working on is trying to, fix the first couple of stimulus that I think largely ignored big sectors of the Latino community. Number one, if you look at one area that I think that was particularly impactful, especially here in Arizona, was the really bad rollout of the PP program, the Paycheck Protection Program. That really did not aid our community. We have a lot of small business owners here that have either tenuous relationships with financial institutions or just non-existent. And as a matter of fact, of the first the first batch or thousands of batches, I should say, of PP program, we think that only about 8% of them actually ended up going to Latino small businesses. And remember, Arizona is it's about 33% Latino. It has a very strong private sector workforce that is run by small Latino and owned operations, but they were largely left out. So our next opportunity that we had to basically fix this, we decided to make sure that there was more access to capital that was going to be available to these small businesses, particularly giving more money to nonprofits and CDFIs that actually helped in Latino communities. And that was actually a very important change. We were able to see tangible money going out the door when we gave money to local CDFIs that specialized in Latino businesses, and where the average, I believe the average business loan in Arizona was on $80,000. This CDFI was giving out the average business loan of $40,000. So it's having its effect. We need to kind of continue that effort. Then we also were trying to undo, really more of a state burden problem. We decided to add a surge, I would say, of unemployment benefits, and especially important for in Arizona, because in Arizona, the minimum wage is one of the lowest in the country. It's only about $240 a month. And so we added the pandemic unemployment assistance, which basically added an extra $600 on top of the $240 you get from the state government. And so with that, we hope that obviously people can survive with that. Unfortunately, what happened is that gig workers, workers that had 1099s, like hairdressers, tattoo artists, Uber drivers, they were by law eligible to receive that assistance. But the state of Arizona's employment system is so outdated that we were set back almost 6 weeks until a lot of people were able to actually get their checks. Wow. And so a lot of what I was doing actually is just helping out, your everyday gig worker, Uber driver, apply for these for this money. And it has been important. It has actually changed a lot of lives now that's finally going through. So again, PP and then unemployment. And then lastly, I'm really just working with my local municipalities. I represent basically 4 cities, Glendale, Towson, Guadalupe, and the city of Phoenix. Towson, Guadalupe, and the city of Phoenix are majority Hispanic cities. And Glendale has a sizable population also. Those cities are really getting impacted by COVID-19 and the social distancing that it requires in order for us to stop it. Arizona cities are largely sales tax dependent. And if people aren't out buying, shopping, eating, there's nothing you can really tax. So I've been working a lot with those municipalities and make sure that we find ways for us to either get money from the federal government or other types of programs to make sure that they don't go and cut too much programming. And right now, most of these cities are doing their annual budgets, and it's clear that that COVID-19 has impacted their budgets. And if they start cutting budgets, the areas they're going to cut are areas that can particularly hurt us when it comes to, for example, like parks and recreations or other types of services that we deem are very important to having a viable city that nurtures the Latino community.
Thank you for sharing that. And that actually reflects some of the questions that we've been getting here during our session that have come in that have really pointed to sort of the need for some work at the local level, right? So you're talking about sort of, it sounds like your office is even doing casework, right? And so there's a need, right? And so there's a need, I think, for many in our community to help on a one-to-one basis, right? And they're talking about municipalities where sort of there's innovations where people are figuring out sort of permitting processes and figuring out things even for the small businesses to help them stay on their feet or get on their feet, right? And the need to sort of drill down to the local level to try to assist folks on a case-by-case basis. One thing I think that sort of plays out at both the local and the national level that we actually also got a question about that I thought you might have some thoughts on and insight on is, again, it's sometimes tough to remember all of the things we need to keep track of given sort of the way the headlines are, but we are in the midst of the US Census, right, of our decennial census, and it's obviously significantly challenged because of so much shelter at home direction and the need and the correct need for folks to stay home. But so what are your thoughts on what is it as a community we need to do to ensure, because again, we've been traditionally undercounted and we're at risk of being even greater. Do you have any sort of thoughts or advice for folks and what folks in the community can do to try and help ensure that we try to have folks participate as much as possible?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of census count committees, especially at the local level. So I really encourage you to engage with your census count committee around the programming they're doing to encourage you to fill out the census. Every major city and state's going to have a census count committee. If you can actually be on that committee, I think it'd be actually extremely helpful to have some outside perspectives. And that committee is going to be working to basically either pass the messages through social media, through local influencers, through just regular TV to make sure to fill out your survey. And honestly, if you just want to help every day, just put on your Facebook and on your Twitter, just a reminder, fill out your census, here's a link. Because you can do this online now too, which is very helpful.
That's great. Thanks very much. And another piece I think that we've seen folks talk a lot about and has direct economic impact is questions about folks with student debt, right? So what is the current status on the federal student loan requirements and the possibility? I know that there still exist, I think, the federal student loan forgiveness programs, et cetera. Are you seeing any action or have you been getting any input from constituents around them?
Well, my constituents have largely been asking for, forgiveness, at least in the meantime, until the COVID-19 situation is over. You have a lot of strong support among the Democratic caucus to do that. And obviously, we were going to try to incorporate that into our next stimulus bills. In terms of the debt forgiveness program, that was a program that really the Betsy DeVos administration really has not been doing. It's unfortunate. It was a really good program rolled out under President Obama. But the fact is, for some reason, the Department of Education is not approving as many of these debt forgiveness programs. So we really need to have a stronger push for that on the legislative level, since it clearly is not being done by the executive.
Great, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Let's see, one other question I think we may even squeeze into. what are your thoughts about helping our communities prepare for the long-term impact? So I know that the relief packages you all have been passing are absolutely necessary for sort of immediate relief for folks who are in crisis right now. But we also have to be thinking, right, about sort of the potential long-term implications for this, and folks who are not going to recover as much, jobs are not going to come back, et cetera. What is it our communities can be doing to help prepare themselves better? Is it a question of retraining? Is it a question of moving into new industries?
Well, it's a combination of things. Number one, the government is going to have to relook at the credit programs in terms of, you know, your Experian and all these different types of credit, consumer credit. This pandemic is going to really affect a lot of consumer credits of Latino community. Many of them were barely able to, you know, are barely living paycheck to paycheck. Now they have no paycheck, and I sincerely believe a lot of them went into debt. Just to kind of make ends meet. And when they come out of this and try to start their small businesses or try to, you know, buy their small home or buy a car, whatever it is, they're not going to be able to do it because of their bad credit. So we're going to have to figure out a way to work with the credit agencies or to regulate the credit agencies to have some level of, I'd say, credit forgiveness to get our community ready to go out of this. Where I believe we're going to have to offer a lot of low-term loans for people to basically reorganize their lives. Be able to move into apartments, be able to afford a down payment on a house. I think we're going to have to allow people to go back to school and access educational grants that were only, you know, accessible one time or two times, because yes, they are going to have to retrain themselves into a new workforce. And then lastly, back again to like small businesses, small Latino-owned businesses, we're going to have to set up, in my opinion, either through the charitable organizations, like for example, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, retraining programs for small businesses. You know, I'll give you a good example. I have a new home. I'm you know, doing pretty good, you know, stocking it up and buying stuff, everything online. But I need my backyard landscaped. And there was somebody who left a little flyer on my door saying, I'll do your landscaping. And it was a young Latino man, but, you know, I shouldn't have even picked up the paper, but, you know, I wanted to see what he was advertising. And, you know, I called them up and I said, hey, I'd be interested if you could do my backyard, you know, how much and what work have you done? The young man didn't have a website. He didn't have even an Instagram with photos of what he's done before. He didn't have a way for me to pay online. I actually ended up talking to him about that. I'm sure he's pretty annoyed with me, but now he does have an Instagram page where he's showing some of his work. But there's a lot of small Latino businesses that are digitally behind, that we need to get them up to speed, up to par, so they could, you know, participate in this next, you know, the reopening of the American economy.
That's a really great point. That's really helpful. And I think that points to sort of, I think, again, potential areas we have to try and see our way through this crisis, right? Given that we have a younger population, our younger students are much more technologically savvy. And like you said, some of the things are actually fairly simple. Like they don't necessarily need super complex websites, but they do need an online payment account, right? Whether it's PayPal or Venmo or any of the other Cash App, et cetera. Not endorsing any specific company. Right. Yeah. Any particular, but the idea being those are actually relatively simple accounts to set up that could actually really facilitate transaction, right? And economic activity for some of our. Or
just, I mean, again, just like even having like the ability for me to look at their previous work.
Photos, yeah.
Yeah, you know, so this is the kind of stuff that I think, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be mandated by the federal government. We could definitely, I think, you know, give funds to organizations that could help out with that. But this is a really great way, I think, for kind of small business assistant programs to basically help them professionalize and move to the next level.
Yeah. And I think, again, in my mind, that's when people think about sort of what can I do, like that's another thing that's fairly easy, that again, someone with some knowledge might be able to help. Again, some neighbors, some other folks in their community, some relatives even, right? So, well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Gallego. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.
Be safe out there.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. All right, and now going on to our fourth speaker. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Martín A. Rosas, who is a UFCW International Vice President and President of 13,000-member UFCW District Union Local 2, which is based in Bel Air, Kansas. Mr. Rosas has 29 years of experience in the labor movement and is here to share his insights and learnings during this challenging time for Latino workers. So welcome, Mr. Rosas. How are you doing?
Doing great, Marco. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Thank you for the invitation.
De nada, bienvenido. So tell us, what are you seeing? You're there in Kansas, you're leading the Union Local 2. What are you hearing from your workers and equally important, their families and the communities around them?
Well, definitely the COVID-19 pandemic hasn't bring an unprecedented challenge for the nation food supply and every worker in the food processing industry. The UFCW represents over 250,000 workers in this industry across the nation. Definitely our members, the workers on these facilities has been on the front line of this pandemic. These workers put in their life at risk every single day when they attend to work. They're being considered by the administration as a critical and essential. The President Trump invoked the Defense Production Act, which forced this industry to remain open. However, the invocation of the act lacks of any protection for the working people in this industry.
Wow, that's great. So how are you seeing the union respond to that, and or families and communities? What measures are being taken to help protect your members from exposure?
Well, one of the biggest challenges that we have around this industry as a whole is, from the get-go that we were forced to work, members were forced to work. And as I always say, we were building a plane flying. We've been able to work in conjunction with the federal agency, the CDC, OSHA, to institute some protocols. This local union, personally, we work hand by hand to recommend and institute those protocols in the industry, which is, is very challenging because as well, they invoke these recommendations. It's a lack of enforcement in those. So that makes it difficult for any other employer to obey those laws or those regulations.
Wow, great. And are you hearing many cases of employees providing their own equipment, or if the employer isn't providing it, or are they just going without? What are some of the potential solutions?
Well, what happened is, and when we talk about the packing industries that we represent, the employers are mandated to provide all the PPE necessary, such as face masks, face shields, and any additional equipment that might be needed in the very near future. We've been working with some of these employers that we represent, where we negotiate such equipment, that they're mandated to fulfill those requirements. Like I said, we work with the CDC throughout the industry. They spend a couple weeks in our facilities, and we work in conjunction to come up with some guidelines and recommendations and protocols.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks for your advocacy on behalf of so many workers, and certainly hope that some of that, as you said, even though it's not being mandated, it's not being forced, hopefully folks are using some good judgment, and at least some employers are taking that into consideration and are trying to add that for some of our, being that so many of our workers are on the front lines. I wanted to ask you about sort of other aspects of the jobs. PPE is obviously the primary focus, and we're glad to hear that you were able to negotiate that. But when we were preparing for this event, you mentioned that there have been some changes you all have managed also to secure, for example, changes around, I think, absence policies. Can you share a little bit about what folks like UFCW have been able to do to help workers? Because I'm sure that's another factor, right?
Well, the UFCW is the largest private sector union in the United States with 1.3 million members. So not only the packing plants, but retail too. We've been able to negotiate flexibility in the attendance policies. Also, we've been able to negotiate sick pay leave for some of these facilities, not in everyone, but most of them. We've been able to negotiate in excess of 2 weeks of pay. If the employee presents any symptoms or he or she has been placed in quarantine, they're receiving an excess of 2 weeks pay. We're in process to expand that, the hazardous pay. It varies from $2 to $6 extra per hour, and depends on the facility that we negotiate, because our members being exposed to work under pandemic status right now.
Yeah, that's great. Two more questions, perhaps, I think. So one, and I think you've alluded to it, but are there any other thoughts you have or any other lessons you all have learned about the need? I think a lot of the debate right now is about this question of balancing the health concerns and needs with the economic concerns and needs, right? We want to protect lives. We want to ensure folks are able to be safe and to prevent exposure and spread of the virus. But at the same time, there are calls about sort of economic activity. How have you seen folks, and how are the workers who are part of the union able to sort of negotiate that balance? What are you seeing?
Well, definitely, we have to remain vigilant and you know, open to changes. This virus is very vicious and it keeps changing. So therefore, we being lobbying on behalf of the workers that the line speed production line should be reduced accordingly with the current scenarios. Most of those standards were created back when we were operating the normal conditions per se. Today, we are confronted with a very different scenarios. You know, we working with employees are required to wear more equipment. I mean, I was just having a conversation with someone today, you know, people who is not familiar with this, the packing industry is the side of that industry that works in a very extreme temperatures. And we have to think about how that's going to change the dynamics in summertime where people is mandated to wear masks and also working in the very extreme health conditions. So we have to remain vigilant. And I know it's a difficult balance to maintain when you talk about maintaining the economic balance, but also remain productive and open for the food chain. But we have to be consistent in one thing. We need to work with the local and state federal agencies to provide some protocols, mandate protocols. Doesn't serve any purpose if all they do is recommend it, because that doesn't have any source of enforcement. And I talk on behalf of those that we don't represent, because while the UFCW represent over 250,000 people in the industry, it's some more additional people that doesn't have any sort of representation. So I'm extremely concerned about the well-being of those human beings not working in conditions that no one is out there to monitor and lobby on their behalf.
Got it. Thank you. Well, and speaking of you being a resource to not just the members of the union, but also to many others in the community, is my understanding also that UFCW has a website. I think it's called, is it Shop Smart? Is that right? That provides resources. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that could be helpful, I think, to many of the folks viewing, right?
Yes, so the UFCW we engage, we have a website called Shop Smart. People can go to the ufcw.org website, and we are having a national-wide campaign, not only in the packing plants, but on retail. How can we coordinate to those individuals working the retail to be protective for their well-being? Along the nation, we've been working in conjunction, like I said, with the federal agencies, try to lure the agencies on things or best practices that has been instituted in some places, so they can recommend those across the nation. So we have several programs in place. Shop Smart is one of those that we are utilizing now to the maximum extent and promoting in our local unions across the nation.
That's great. So any final advice, insights to share with our audience from your perspective?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I would like to say, you know, en la vida no nos han dado nada gratis a los latinos. Todo lo hemos ganado peleando, y a los trabajadores también. In life, nothing has been come without a fight, so we must remain vigilant and working as one to fight for what we want. It's people's life who is at risk now, and we more than ever need to consider ourselves to being as a one. The labor movement is the only source of really defense that the workers have right now. So therefore, I encourage people to contact any labor organization. I hope they choose the UFCW, because that's the only chance they have to have someone who's willing to represent their well-being.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you so much for being here with us, Martin. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. And please do pass on, I know I speak on behalf of everyone at CHCI, and I'm sure all of the folks in our audience, please do pass on our thanks to the workers, to the members of your union who are on the front lines every day, helping ensure that our food supply continues to reach us and to provide the sustenance that we need. We know that folks are making personal sacrifices, exposing themselves, continuing to do work, exposing themselves to the virus, et cetera, potentially. And so we're really just grateful for all that tremendous work that's really, again, keeping the nation fed and healthy and so on. And so we're grateful for all the work that you're doing on their behalf and on the work that they're doing directly. So thanks for being with us today here, Mr. Rosas, and we'll be in touch as well.
Thank you, Marcos. Muchas gracias. Que tengan un excelente día.
A usted, que le vaya bien. So I want to thank all of our speakers today. That brings us to a close for our program today. I want to thank everyone who joined us. We hope these discussions have been valuable to you all. Please be sure to check our website, chci.org, for updates. As I mentioned, we'll try to put up information trying to address some of the topics and themes that we got, some of the questions. Apologies again that we didn't get to them. There were so many good questions and so many important topics for our community. We'll try to get to more and provide that. We do also have resources already up on our website. We have a COVID-19 resources page, so go to our website and you can find that. They're useful links to information that already exists that is available to help individuals and families. We've actually gathered information both in English and in Spanish where we could, so that there's information that can be disseminated to communities. And that page also highlights some of the work our partners are doing to respond to this crisis. We have great partners and friends in the private sector who are doing their part as well in practice to complement and supplement the work that's being done at the policy level by our distinguished members of Congress. Please be sure to register and join us for the third session of our virtual briefing series. It's going to be a two-parter focused on education in both the K-12 space and on higher ed. That's happening on Wednesday, June 3rd. The first session will be 1 to 2 p.m. The second session will be 3 to 4 p.m. Registration information will be coming up shortly for that. And then finally, immediately at the conclusion of the webinar, as I mentioned at the beginning, a link is going to pop up on your screen prompting you to please take a survey asking for your feedback on our session. Please fill it out and let us know how we can improve. And once again, I want to thank the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, who sponsored our session today, and for all the work that they do. As I mentioned earlier, we greatly appreciate their efforts. As we mentioned earlier, please do your part to help your neighbors, to help your partners get through this crisis that we're in together. As folks have mentioned, we may all be in the same storm, but we're not necessarily all in the same boat. It's affecting us differently, and so any help you can provide to one another is great. And don't forget to fill out your census and to encourage others to be sure to fill out the census. Lastly, but absolutely not least, I want to thank my colleagues at CHCI who have worked extremely hard throughout this series and again for today to make this session possible and hopefully to make it a success. We wish you all a great afternoon, and as always, please stay safe and healthy.